What's going on, duelists? It's your boy Nick, bringing you today on the channel sort of a combos and I guess test hand video for my Dinomorphia deck list for the post-December 2024 ban list. For those of you new to the channel, welcome. My name is Nick. We do Yu-Gi-Oh content mainly focused around rogue and casual decks alike. If that's the kind of Yu-Gi-Oh that you're interested in, then I highly encourage you to subscribe to the channel. We are so close to our 2,000 subscriber goal, and I need your help to get there. So with the intro out of the way, Dinomorphia is a deck that I recently brought to two different locals. One of them I took first place, and the second one I topped with a 3-1 record. And honestly, the deck has been a bit of a meta call for me, and it's been performing very well, especially into the Ryziel boards, and even the Malice decks to some degree. And I'm just here to kind of go over some of the lines and the little nuances with the deck, things you want to watch out for, and more or less how you should be piloting the deck, because obviously our goal here as Yu-Gi-Oh players is to just get better with time and just kind of help each other out. I mean, you know, obviously you go to locals, you meet new people, and this game can be very intimidating, especially for newer players, not only because of cost and or budget, but also just because of how big the game has gotten and how crazy the archetypes are and the cards in general are. So I think it's nice to just kind of like sit down and have this be more of like an informative kind of video for those of you who do want to build Dinomorphia, because it is not only a budget deck, but a very strong one at that. And obviously, I know there are people who just kind of roll their eyes at a deck like this and think, oh, it's just brainless or brain dead. You know, you're just setting 5 passing, you're guaranteed the dub almost every time, and that's really not the case. I mean, yeah, it's one thing that, like, if you have Solemn Judgment, but it's another thing entirely to know exactly when and where to use that, because this is the kind of deck that you get your life points so dangerously low that if you don't sequence your cards correctly or activate stuff, you know, at the time you should, you can very easily lose a game by having your opponent just go battle phase and beat over something. And with the damage you take, you know, in the difference, you just automatically lose. Because again, this deck does get your life points that crazily low. I think, actually at the first tournament I went to, the one that I took first at, I ended up closing out a game with like under 20 life points, believe it or not, which was really insane. But again, I want this to be more of an informative video. Dinomorphia is an archetype that I really have been enjoying playing this past few weeks, and I just want to, you know, kind of bless some of you guys and girls with my knowledge about the deck, and hopefully anybody that wants to play this deck can actually just get better by watching this video. So with all that out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and pile shuffle the deck here, and we will be going with test hands, and I'll be explaining what you should be doing in any given scenario. So give me a moment, we'll be right back. Alright, so I got the deck all pile shuffled here for you duelists, and I'm going to cut the deck live on camera so you guys can see that I'm not trying to stack or anything like that. Like, I'm not trying to give myself better hands than I should. This is going to give you the most real and accurate representation of what the deck is like. So we're going to start with our 5-card hand. Before we dive in, I do want to point out that the deck profile for this exact list will be linked in the description box below. So if you want to, feel free to go ahead and check that out. Make sure you do. And maybe, depending on how long the test hands and combos take, I might even show you guys some siding patterns. That way you guys can have better knowledge as to what you should be siding into and what to look out for when siding. So this is our 5-card opening hand. We're going to play this out like we're going first, obviously. So we do have Frenzy, which is amazing. We have Soul the Supreme King, which is another amazing supplementary engine for the Dinomorphia deck. Iron Thunder, another Soul the Supreme King, but a little bit redundant. And we have a Called by the Grave. So already this hand going first is absolutely incredible. Not only do we have access to engine in the form of Frenzy, but we even have a card to make sure it resolves, because the only thing that this card loses to is Ash Blossom, really, because it's a fusion trap that can use material from deck, similar to like Branded Fusion. So your opponent can Ash Blossom this, and that's something you do want to be conscious of, because all the Dinomorphia traps do make you pay half your life for cost. And the last thing you want to be doing is paying half your life just for your effect to get hit with Ash, and then you're sitting there with like no access to engine if this doesn't resolve, and you're down half your life, and your opponent can just like normal summon whatever, do like a half-ass combo and just OTK you. So the fact that we have Called by in the hand really ensures that we are not losing to Ash Blossom. Plus, we're not losing to any board breakers either, because we also hard open the Iron Thunder. So, you know, if they have like main deck Lightning Storm or main deck Duster or main deck Evenly, not that decks are doing that, but you never know. We also have an answer for that as well. assuming we're going first. And then the Soul of the Supreme King package is actually pretty cool because, again, it's a supplementary engine that not only pays half our life for cost, which the Dinomorphias want anyway, but it gives us not only a really big body in the form of Supreme King Zark on the field to help kind of wall up a bit, but it also deters our opponents from using spell cards or spell effects because of the graveyard effect of Soul of the Supreme King. So oftentimes what I like doing is actually leading with Supreme King in the draw phase, simply so that I can, here, let me explain this. So, like, obviously with this particular hand, we're going to pretty much we'll set 4. We'll hold the additional Soul of the Supreme King because it's a hard once per turn anyway. So, I mean, you could set it, but again, just on the off chance that they have, like, double breaker, you know, because if they have, like, a board breaker, we'll obviously Iron Thunder it. But then if they have a second breaker, you know, we're going to lose pretty much, we'll have to chain everything depending on what the breaker is. And then we want to have at least a card to get us back in the game for follow-up potentially. So I wouldn't be greedy and set 5 in this case. I would hold the Soul here. Now we're going to pass turn, right? Opponent's going to draw. In their draw phase, we are going to use our copy of Soul of the Supreme King, paying half our life, and we're going to summon out a Supreme King Zark from our extra deck. Generally, what I like doing is summoning the Zark into attack position. I never really go defense with the Zark. The reason for this is because there's a lot of Xyz decks, like, for example, Raziel, that are in the format, and just other Xyz decks in general. You never want any of your opponents to, like, go battle phase with an Xyz and just to, like, hit the Zark, take damage, because if it's in defense, their attacking monster won't die. And then in main phase 2, they just overlay for Zeus, and then Zeus can sweep the board. You don't want that. So that means if they do try to make, like, a Saki, like, Xyz player or whatever, if they go battle phase, they have to, like, crash into the Zark, and they take, you know, their monster dies unless it has, like, protection of some sort. It's harder for them to, like, Saki with the Zeus in main phase 2. So something, again, just helping all of you duelists who are on this deck become better pilots. You want to summon the Zark in attack mode most of the time. Keep in mind its effects are negated. And actually, one other thing that I didn't mention, which you should be conscious of, is you want to try to keep, and I totally failed at this, but you want to try to keep your scale zones open if you can. Obviously, I didn't do that here, but I'm telling you this now. You want to make sure that you have at least one pen scale open. Reason for this is because if the Zark is destroyed, it will trigger its effect to float and place itself into the pen scale. And it has a very crazy floodgate effect in the pen zone. So you want to make sure that you have an available scale. So don't do what I did and set, like, the called by here. You'd probably just set called by here. Keep the pen zone open. That way, if the opponent does have some type of, like, removal for the Zark that is destruction based, the Zark can at least float into the pen zone and proceed to floodgate your opponent from there with his crazy pendulum effect that he has. So just some info on that. Plus, the reason why I do this in draw phase is because now it forces our opponent to play a little awkwardly, because if they do have a spell in their hand, whether it's engine or non-engine that they want to use, they have to play into the Zark Supreme King setup, where if they activate a spell, we can banish the Soul, banish the Zark for cost, and then we get to summon a Pendulum Dragon, a Synchro Dragon, Xyz Dragon, and Fusion Dragon, or, you know, whatever targets you're playing. I'm playing the Brave Eyes Pendulum and the Crystal Clearwing Synchro Dragon as targets, with occasionally Arc Rebellion and Xyz Dragon also being a target in some scenarios. But doing this in the draw phase forces your opponent to play into this. If they want to commit their spells, you're basically going to get 2 free bodies out of it that have crazy effects. Plus, not to mention, this graveyard effect of Soul of the Supreme King, if they do activate a spell, can be ashed, and you would rather have them ash that than ash your engine like Frenzy. Again, that does not matter because we hard opened the called by, so we're playing through ash anyway. But in the scenario where you didn't draw the one of called by, I like leading with Soul of the Supreme King in a lot of scenarios because, again, it pays half my life already, and it also makes it harder for them to want to use their spell cards. Because if they do, they're going to play into the Zark setup, and if they have the Ash, they have the Ash, like, right? Like, we don't get these, but that's fine, because if they do have Ash, I'd rather them burn it on, like, my non-engine, so to speak, than burn it on my actual engine, like Frenzy. So again, something to keep in mind. Try not to clog your pen scale. Try to leave at least one open. That way, if the Zark is destroyed, it can float there. And then, like I said, leading with this first just makes it harder for them to want to use their spells. So if we've gotten this far, they go standby, they go main. And, you know, you kind of just get a feel for what they're playing, right? Like, you want them to commit just a little bit, just so you can kind of see what matchup you're against and then make your decision accordingly. Also, you want them to commit at least some type of cards to the field, or card, singular, because you also want to try your best to play around impermanence. Like, yes, they cannot imperm the Zark because it's already negated, but what you don't want them doing is, like, you don't want to go Frenzy to summon a fusion like Kentragina, and then they, like, when you activate Kentragina effect to copy the trap, in this case Frenzy, you do not want them to impermanence the Ket, because then you're in a really bad spot as well. Again, we do have the Iron Thunder for that instance, but again, you want to try to, like, save this for more impactful cards. Like, you want to be able to play better so you don't have to burn your insanely powerful non-engine pieces on something like impermanence because you're just playing into it. Like, you want to the best of your ability, be able to play around your opponent's disruptions. So by having them commit to cards first, at least you know that they can't impermanence you from the hand if they had it, which is obviously strong. So you let them commit, maybe they normal summon or special something or whatever, activate a spell or not. If they might not want to, if they're perceptive and read the graveyard effect of this card and they don't have Ash, there's a very good chance that they will choose not to activate a spell. In which case, you'll just go Frenzy at whatever point you feel is correct. You'll pay half your life again. Now, keep in mind, we've already paid half 2 times, which means that at resolution of the Frenzy, we will already be down to 2,000 life points, assuming we started at 8k. So what that means is we don't have to go into the Kentragina if we do not want to, because usually what we'll do is we'll go Ket first. I guess it just depends on the scenario and what you're playing into. For example, if they shifter you, you don't want to make the Kentragina anyway, because that means that's more material that has to get banished for your summons. You would probably just go straight for the Rex, because then you don't have to send as many monsters as fusion material to the banish zone. So that's another thing to keep in mind. But again, depending on the situation, I guess you kind of feel it out. But for the purposes of this particular combo, let's just go ahead and make the Rexstrom here. So we're going to dump Diplos. I like dumping Diplos first because, again, this is the worst starter between him and Theresia. I would rather be drawing Theresias than drawing this on a subsequent turn. So I usually try to get this out of the deck at my earliest convenience. So with Frenzy, it allows you to send 1 material from deck and 1 from the extra deck. So we'll dump the Diplos first, and then we'll usually just send a Stealthberg. And then, like I said, in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose to make the Rexstrom because we'll already be at 2,000 life at resolution of this, so there's almost no need to jump through Kentragina. I guess it just depends on the scenario. And then, like I said, if you do this after they've committed some number of cards to the board, now you know that you're not losing to impermanence, you know, because you don't want to do this early while they still have no cards, and then their next play is just like, imperm target Rex, and then you're just kind of sitting there looking like an idiot. So you don't want to fall for that either. And sometimes your opponent will try to bait you into stuff, but again, you gotta outsmart them. Like I said, this is like a game of cat and mouse to some degree. So we'll make the Rex here. Anything, if we gotten this far, we're already in a very strong position because we still have a called by to like stop any graveyard shenanigans. Like if your opponent's on Raziel and they go like X to send Mirror Logic, you can just like totally mess them up out of that play by just called buying the Mirror Logic, because you know they're going to try to out the Rex with the Mirror Logic negate, because Raziel, again, they don't have a very good out into this card. Again, a lot of decks don't, but like obviously Raziel's a deck that a lot of people are playing this format, and outside of Mirror Logic, Raziel does not have a solid way to clear this card in Engine. To be honest, I don't think they have any way to clear this card in Engine. I mean, like what, even outside of their archetype, like what rank 4 are they making that beats this? Outside of like maybe Baguska, which some Raziel lists aren't even playing. And even then, Baguska doesn't actually out this. All it does is stall for time. So like Baguska alone doesn't deal with this. Like they would still have to make Baguska. Everything goes to defense, but which now they've also flooded themselves, because if they commit anything, like they can't make another Xyz, because then that Xyz also gets put to defense. So like they're not beating over the Rex. Like, they would still need enough material to, like, make a link play, try to go battle. And then, again, look, we still have the Called By and the Iron Thunder to stop anything like that. And, again, the Iron Thunder would also pay half our life for activation, which means we come down to 1,000 life points, which floodgates them even harder under the Rex, because now that's more cards that they can't use. within their engine. Because I know some of the Razio monsters have low attack, like I believe X, forgive me if I'm incorrect about that. But I mean, the lower your life is, the less they get to activate as far as monster effects go. So just keep that in mind. And then again, if they commit to using a spell, then we just go banish the Trap Engrave, banish the Zark, and we just get to summon out. Again, the usual targets are Clearwing and the Pendulum Brave Eyes Dragon, which is obviously very strong. Which just like this already, like if they're gonna pass on a suboptimal board, we already have lethal on the crackback. This is over 9,000 damage. Then we're gonna get a draw for our next turn, which is obviously really crazy. And that's assuming they commit to a spell, depending on how important they thought that was. Which obviously puts them in a really bad position. Like I said, already at this point, the game's already in our favor. Now let's just assume they don't commit any spells, and because they know that like this, the effect of the trap states that on the end of the next turn, the Zark will get shuffled back into the extra deck. If they think they're gonna like kind of stall and just wait till this gets shuffled back so they can then use their spells, what we'll do is if they pass turn, and we're at this juncture here, we'll just draw for turn, right? So we drew into Card of Demise. That is absolutely cracked. And then what'll happen here is we'll tribute our Supreme King Zark to go ahead and actually special summon our Odd Eyes Arcade Dragon from our extra deck using its effect. And what this does is this card's name is always treated as Zark. So what this means is that we still control a Zark on field, but it's not the Zark that the trap summoned, which means that the end phase, this Zark will not shuffle back. This Zark stays on field, which effectively keeps them under that spell lock, so to speak, as long as this is out. Like, if your opponent thought they were going to be cute and, like, just pass back to you and be like, oh, they can't OTK me, like, I'll just wait to use my spells on turn 4. That's not going to work, because once we make this card, they're forever locked onto this restriction. So either they have to use their spells and play into this, or they choose not to use their spells, and then we have like 7k damage on board for the crackback. So that's on them. Plus, we drew Card of Demise, which means like there's almost no way we lose this from this position, assuming that that's how that plays out. Which again makes the deck pretty cracked. So that's kind of to give you like a little bit of an example of what you should be doing, at least with that particular hand that we drew. So let me go ahead and reshuffle, and we'll do another test hand, and we'll talk a little bit more about your lines and how you should be sequencing your stuff and just more advice in general. Because again, we're all here to help each other out. All right, Duelist, just got done pile shuffling here. If you are watching this video and you are so far not subscribed to the channel, make sure you're subscribed, like the video as well, comment down below what you Duelists think of this deck list. And if you have any suggestions or any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Again, we're all just here to better ourselves and become better pilots at the decks that we really love and enjoy. So again, if you're watching this and you're not subbed, make sure you're subbed. And now that we've got a good shuffle, we're going to cut. And again, we're just going to play this out like we're going first. Obviously, this deck prefers to go first, although it can go second because the trap cards that it plays are so high impact that sometimes you don't even care if you lose the die roll game 1. But we're going to draw our 5-card hand, Soul the Supreme King again, Dinomorphia Domain, Dinomorphia Theresia, Dominus Impulse, and another Soul the Supreme King. So this is already another incredible test hand, again, for going first or second even. But in either case, we're just going to assume that we're going first here. So not only did we draw the Soul of the Supreme King again, which again is another amazing supplementary engine, drawing 2 isn't really needed. I mean, it sucks that we drew duplicates in both hands, but not only do we have access to engine with Domain, but we also have access to engine with Theresia. So 2 ways to access engine, plus we have Impulse, which is just an insane trap this format. And really, Impulse is not needed in the deck, although it is very strong. If you have access to the card and can afford it, then by all means, max out on this. This card is custom. But if you don't have access to this card because you're playing on a budget, then fear not. There's plenty of other normal traps that you can substitute this card for. I mean, the list is endless. I mean, off the top of my head, I don't have any immediately that I can mention, but this is not required. Just prefacing that now. But looking at this hand, obviously we drew Theresia, so you're definitely going to want to lead with that. Now, here's the thing. You activate her effect. They're usually going to Veiler, Impermit. They cannot Ash this card because there's nothing she does that plays into Ash. If they have Imperm Veiler, that's fine. You don't care because you already have access to Engine. So if they want to burn a hand trap on her, then that's more than fine. But if it does resolve, what do you think you should be setting from the deck? Because you already have access to Engine, so what are you lacking here? You know, like what hurts you basically? Like obviously ashing on Domain sucks. You never want that. So in these cases where I draw Theresia plus access to my fusions, what I like doing is setting a card like Intact, which is their counter trap, the one that stops monsters, and its only activation condition is if they activate a monster while you control a Dinomorphia card. Keyword there is card. Doesn't say monster, it says card, which means if we go activate Domain and they chain Ash Blossom, we now control a Dinomorphia card, which means Intact is chainable and can stop the Ash and basically ensure that our Domain does resolve, which is correct. So in these cases, since we have Theresia plus access to Engine, I usually choose to set Intact, assuming she resolves, obviously. And then what I'll do with the rest of the hand is set my Engine card, set my Soul the Supreme King, and I will set my Impulse. Again, try your best to keep your pen zone open for that Zark in case it is destroyed. It has a really crazy pendulum effect. So what we'll do here is we'll pass turn, right? In the draw phase, again, I always like going Soul the Supreme King, pay half my life, and just stick that Zark on the field, again, usually in attack mode, to play around, like, you know, their Xyz monsters, trying to, like, go battle phase and make a quick Zeus. Our life's already halved, and again, we do this in draw phase, because, again, this forces their hand to play awkwardly. If they have spells, they have to play into the Zark line. And again, if they have Ash, like, they either have to burn the Ash on this, or they have to burn the Ash on the Domain. But again, ashing Domain in this case won't do anything, because we've already set Intact. And the opponent will know that, because obviously they get to look at what we set off Theresia. So if they're a smart player, they'll know that they're not stopping us from getting to our fusion. Also, like, this kind of is a little bit telegraphed. If we set Intact, it usually means that we already have access to Domain or Frenzy. Because if we didn't have access to Domain or Frenzy, then we're probably setting one of those off the Theresia anyway. So the fact that we set Intact should tell our opponent that we have access to Fuse, which means that even if they did have Ash, they're not stopping this anyway. So maybe they'd be more inclined to Ash this, because they feel like they got to get some kind of value. But again, that's only assuming they activate spells. And then depending on the spell, we also have Impulse. Like if it's like a spell that will special summon something, like they go Branded Fusion, for example, or like Ostinato or whatever, we have the Impulse with a trap engrave already, so they can literally just get cooked. Which is obviously cracked. But again, so just like the first test hand, you want to establish this first. Then we'll go Domain in this case. Now, Domain's different from Frenzy. Frenzy lets you use material from the extra deck, so Frenzy's the only trap that can actually hard make you a Rex. Domain cannot hard make you a Rex, at least initially, because Rex requires a fusion monster as material, and Domain does not let you use material from the extra deck. You have to go from hand, field, or graveyard. So in this case, since we don't have a Dinomorphia fusion on the board yet, we have to make the Kentragina first, so we're going to dump the Diplos, and to be honest with you, we'll actually probably sack the... This is a tough one. It's a toss whether you keep the Theresia on the board or send another Theresia from deck. I guess for the purposes of this particular line, we'll send a Theresia from deck. Just deck thin a little bit. And we will go ahead and make our Kentragina. Now again, if your opponent is dumb and they choose to Ash this knowing that we had Intact, then they're just an idiot. Or they just simply don't know what the hell's going on. So if they want to do that, that's perfectly fine by me. We have our life twice. Well, 3 times technically if you counted Supreme King. So we should be at 1,000 life, assuming we've activated all 3 of these traps. Which is obviously very good. And at this point, we're just here with the Impulse, which is live because we have tons of traps. The Intact in the graveyard, well, the turn we activate Intact, we're not dying by battle this turn. Because any battle damage we take just becomes half our life at the time we take it. So there's no possible way we die here. They could summon a 10,000 attack monster, go battle phase, swing into Theresia. Our life would just become 500 because that would be half of what our current life is. Which is crazy. And then in the graveyard, Intact is also, it stops battle damage for a single battle. You don't got to worry about that this turn, but on subsequent turns, just remember that this card has a graveyard effect to prevent you from getting sacked, which is pretty nice. And then from this point here, we can just go Kentragina. Again, you want them to commit some number of cards to board, so you don't just hard lose to Imperm. But you'll go Kentragina, copy domain, so you're paying half again, which means our life points drop to 1,000 or 500 in this case. And then we'll usually just use the Kentragina on the field, and then we'll send another Diplos from the deck. Again, because we want to deck thin and we want to get Diplos out of the deck. Usually with Diplos, you just want to float into it when your Dinomorphia cards are destroyed, or get access to it off of Dinomorphia alert. And now we just make the Rex. And then again, we pretty much have the game on lock at this point. They still have the Zark interaction to push through if they activate a spell. Like I said, we're getting to the Crystal Clearwing and the Pendulum Dragon. We already have them locked under Rex. And then we have pretty good follow-up plus an Impulse still. So we'll do one more test hand just to see more or less how this goes. Let's just assume on this next test hand, we're going to play it out like we're going second. Again, like if it's game one and we just lost the die roll, so we're going to go second with that particular hand. So let me go ahead and pile shuffle and we'll catch you back here shortly. Alright, Duelists got the deck all pile shuffled. I'm going to go ahead and cut. And again, we're going to play this out like we lost the die roll game one. Our opponent chooses to go first, and we are going to go second. So this would be our 5-card hand. We'll let our opponent do whatever. So we have Alert, Soul the Supreme King, Theresia, Brute, and Impulse. Impulse is nice, obviously, because it can be used, on their turn to kind of mitigate their ceiling a bit. But again, we won't have the ability to get a trap card in the graveyard, at least on their, turn 0. So whatever we use this on won't be destroyed. So we can just choose to hold this. It depends on what they're doing, obviously. But we have a starter. We have Soul the Supreme King access again, which is really strong. And then we have Alert and Brute. These two cards aren't necessarily the greatest because they're not really relevant until you get your engine rolling. But like I said, we do have a starter. So, doesn't matter what they're playing. Let's just assume they make, X board or whatever. They pass back to us. Depending on the match, I mean, I probably would have just held this. It just depends. So it's a crapshoot whether we still have this or it's in the graveyard or not. We'll draw for turn. Another Theresia. Not the best draw. And this is, again, why we play such a low monster count in the main deck. So somebody had brought up, like, why don't you play Fossil Digger so you can access your monsters? Here's the thing. You don't always want to access all your monsters because, like, this deck, you'd rather have your traps than bodies because, like, I wish this was a trap right now because what am I doing with the second Theresia in the hand? Like, if I normal summon one, I don't get the other one unless I have a Time Tearing, which we don't have, obviously. So this just becomes like a dead draw in a way. Like, it just doesn't really give you any value, which is why we're on such a low monster count for this deck specifically. Again, deck profile linked in the description below if you haven't looked at that already. So whatever, not an ideal draw, but it's fine. I mean, we can make do with it. So we'll normal summon Theresia. Keep in mind we're going second, right? So they're probably going to have disruption for this. There is little chance that this resolves. I mean, I guess it just depends on what kind of end board they have. Not every deck is going to end on a monster negate necessarily, or they may, even if they have a negate, they may let this slide. It just depends because this is why doing test hands is kind of tough, but let's just assume that she resolves. If it does resolve, you already know, like, we're getting either Frenzy or Domain. Probably Frenzy though, if I'm being totally honest. But let's just pretend it doesn't resolve, right? Because again, we are going second. Our opponent's gonna have some kind of disruption, or at least we hope they will. Because if not, then we're steamrolling them regardless. So we'll go Theresia, activate effect. Let's just say it gets stopped somehow. And which, if it gets stopped, it does like make our hand a lot worse because if we were able to get access to Frenzy or Domain and or Frenzy already turns on Alert. And the Brute's alive because we do control a Dinomorphia, so Brute's not too bad, but it's really just Alert. Because Alert won't do much for us until we can get names in the graveyard. So if she does get stopped, our hand obviously does get a lot worse. But our saving grace here is Soul the Supreme King and the Impulse. So depending, if it doesn't resolve, obviously we're much worse off. So assuming it doesn't, we're probably just going to set the Soul, set the Impulse, and we'll set the Brute because that's still alive. And we'll just keep Alert and Theresia in hand because there's no reason to commit these cards. Well, A, we can't commit Theresia because we only get one normal summon. And there's almost no reason to commit to this because we don't have a graveyard set up yet. So this card won't give us value necessarily. I mean, I guess you could choose to set it because, I mean, if the Theresia dies, you could try to bring her back. But I don't know. I would probably just hold this, honestly. bluff our opponent into thinking like we have hand traps or something in the hand. But in either case, maybe we go battle phase, maybe we don't. It just depends on what their board looks like. We pass back. As soon as they draw for turn, we're going Soul the Supreme King for sure to make ourselves a Zark. Again, this is all assuming that she did not resolve. Obviously, if she did resolve, we'd be in a much better position to play going second. But again, like I said, it's a control deck. The most control deck's biggest weakness is going second, especially game ones. But all things considered, I mean, having the Zark plus a pop and an impulse is still pretty strong. Again, this all really depends on what they have, is how you're going to choose how you sequence your setup. But with that being said, before we wrap things up, let's go over siding patterns briefly. So I'm going to line up the cards, and I'm going to show you guys more or less what you should be looking at when you side before we wrap things up here. Alright, duelists, we're back. This is the entire main deck lined up for you guys. 41 cards in the main, and depending on the matchup, obviously, the biggest thing is you want to know how to go second, right? Because if you win the die roll game one and you like totally blow your opponent out of the game, there's a very high chance they are not making you go first game two, which means you're usually going second most game twos. Which means you usually want to side into your breaker cards, right? So you want to side into like your Pancratopses, your Sphere Modes, depending on the matchup, and your Evenlies, right? Which is at the very least 9 cards total. And this is usually what I tend to side when going second. So in order to make space for 9 cards, how do you do that going second? Well, what don't you want to draw? You don't want to draw cards that are only good going first. So I usually cut the trap tracks going second because it's not needed, right? It's mainly just a tech card. I cut down on Judgment and Iron Thunder just as I cut down on 1 each because you still want some number of these cards in the main deck. But again, drawing these cards going second into an established board does not feel great. So you want to minimize that instance. You also want to cut down on Alert to 1 because Alert's only really strong going second. If you're going first. If you're going second, you can cut out 1 Alert. So that's already 4 cards that we've cleared, right? Then, again, to kind of cut down on our counter trap package, we're usually cutting out 1 copy of Intact or Sonic. I guess it just depends on the matchup. Like, if you want to keep 3 Intact, cut the Sonic. But I usually like 2 Intact and 1 Sonic for going second. Or you can even cut the Sonic as well if you don't think it's needed. I guess it just depends on the matchup. You make that decision there. But we're going to get rid of Card of Demise. Reason for this is going second. You don't want to use this card, especially if you're like on turn 1, because it locks you out of special summoning. So like you're not able to do things like summon Pank, for example, which is bad. So you're cutting out on that, and then you're cutting down on Morganites usually to a 2 of. And you can also cut out the Called By going second. It's not too relevant. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards cut from the main. Then again, if you want to make space for that 9th card, it really just depends. Sometimes I cut down on Soul the Supreme King going second, or I cut out a single domain. I guess it just depends. Or if you don't need the Sonic, you can cut that out. But usually I'm cutting out Soul the Supreme King because you don't really want to be cutting out your engine if you can avoid it. Because obviously if you break their board successfully, you still need a way to get access back into the game with your engine. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards taken out of the main deck, which means we're able to fit our 9 card sideboard package for going second in the form of triple Pank, triple Sphere Mode, and triple Evenly Matched. In tandem with our impermanences and impulses, we have a lot of cards. Sorry for the glare. We have a lot of really strong cards for being able to break their board and go second. Now, assuming we're going first, you know, in like a game 3 scenario or in a game 2 scenario where we went second game 1, well, that obviously changes, right? So looking back at the list, if we put all the cards back where they belong, this is pretty much what we're looking at with the main deck again, unsided. So if we're going first, there's argument to play the purges, which means you're cutting like whatever. Obviously, you're going to know what the matchup is, so you make that decision based on how you feel about the deck you're going up against. If it's not a spell trap heavy deck, you're probably cutting out Sonic. You could also potentially get away with cutting Soul the Supreme King down from 3 to 2. Never side out of Judgments or Iron Thunders when you're going first, because these cards are what's going to help you beat board breakers in their non-engine. And then if it's a heavy graveyard matchup, like, you know, if it's a Fiendsmith deck or if it's a Malice deck, these are your silver bullets right here. Triple Soul Drain, Chef's Kiss. So you always want to try to make space for that. And you want to try to make space for the anti-spell as well, because going first, you know, why not just sack your opponent and just make it so that they can't even play spells, which means, again, you're going to be getting rid of Soul the Supreme King, most likely. There's argument to even cut this down to 1, depending on the matchup you're facing, to make space. So assuming you wanted to make space for Double Purge, 3 Soul Drain, 1 anti-spell, that's 6 cards. You're probably still getting rid of Trap Tracks, right? So that's already 3 cards gone from the main deck, which is your triple Soul Drain pretty much. You can probably cut down on a Ferret Flames, although it's a really strong card. It really just depends, like I said, on how you want to go about it. You could cut down on a Alert, maybe cut down on an Impulse, and that should be, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards pulled, which means we have space for our triple Soul Drain and 2 Purges. If you want to make space for the 1 of Anti-Spell, you can probably cut down on an Impermanence, and now that makes space for your Anti-Spell. So assuming you're going first, you usually want to be siding into this. And if it's not a graveyard-centric deck, or a deck that focuses around banishment, then the Soul Drains are just not needed. Obviously, you'll make that decision based on, you'll know what you're facing at the time you face it, obviously. In which case, you can keep the 3rd Impulse, keep the 3rd Imperm, and you'd probably be putting back either the 2nd Soul or the 2nd Alert. And like I said, if you're not playing against a graveyard-based deck, there's no reason to side these, obviously. And that's pretty much what your siding patterns would look like for this deck, more or less. Again, there's variance to this. It depends on the matchup, obviously. But that's going to wrap up this video. I'm not even sure what to call this. I mean, you could call it combos and test hands, but I feel like it's a little bit more than that, you know, because this is more like information on how to become a better pilot and just like little nuances with the deck that you want to watch out for if you end up playing this or playing against it. So I don't know what to call this. Maybe you guys should leave down in the comments below. What should I call this video? Let me know what you duelists think. But with that being said, this is Nick hitting that end phase. I want to wish all of you a very happy holidays, and we will catch you in the next video.